So a quick overview of what we're going to present on today. We're going to do an intro to bank reconciliation, what it is, what it does, how it's going to work. We're going to review some of the setup components that are going to allow this to work for us. And then we're going to demo some of the steps and how we would process and reconcile these transactions. And then at the end, there should be plenty of time for questions. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll get to all of those. All right, so cash management overview. This is really what can cash management do. It's going to act as a repository for all of our bank transactions. You can reconcile your bank accounts. You can maintain your account balance information. You can both reconcile and void payments that come from AP. You can reconcile AR and other bank transactions. You can record transfers between your bank accounts. And finally, you can create cash receipts. All right, so there's a couple different types of reconciliation. Reconcile to forecast. This is going to reconcile your bank statements to a forecast category for a specific date. And this does allow you to create journal entries based off of that. On the bottom here, we see reconcile to other system. So it can reconcile to a third-party system with some additional setup and processing there. But the main part that we want to focus on is reconciling to cash ledger, and that's what we're going to focus on today. And this is going to reconcile your bank statement to your cash ledger transactions. And these can originate from AP, AR, or cash management, and it's going to reconcile those for us. So that's really what we're focusing on here. Just a quick touch point is that these are not going to create journal entries for us because they would have already been posted in those other subsystems. All right. Okay. So processing rules. So there's a couple different pieces that we have to set up and configure to help Infor reconcile against that bank statement. And one of those main pieces is going to be the processing rules. So cash transaction processing rules are used to help with categorizing and analyzing the bank statement data. You can set these rules based on different predetermined criteria that you set up. And it's going to allow the system to categorize that incoming bank statement transactions to those defined rules. The processing rule is going to use a custom group to, I like the word interrogate, the bank statement field lines and use the, sorry, there's some more feedback still. The processing rules, you're going to use a custom group to interrogate the bank statement line fields and use the associated processing rule to assign a category. Now that's pretty wordy, but what it means essentially is that it's going to tell Infor how to interpret that bank data and then in comparison to those cash ledger transactions. So it's really telling it how to interact and how to read that data. We go to the next slide. So here we're talking about cash categories. Categories are used to classify the transactions that are processed by the bank. So if anyone's familiar with like a BAI2 file, I don't know how many people out there are familiar with those, but this is where we would indicate that maybe 475 on a BAI2 file can typically mean a check or a check paid. So we tell it, this is kind of where we tie it to say, okay, 475 means check and that sort of thing. These are our categories. They can represent a couple of these different examples here, but that's about it for cash categories. All right, so for bank reconciliation, we have methods, we have rules, and rule groups. So we talked about the rules and how it's going to interpret that data, and we can combine multiple rules together into one rule group so it knows to look for checks versus deposits and that sort of thing. So we can group it all together and get a higher reconciliation rate. And then we get into methods. So a reconciliation method is how you indicate what value will be specified into the line match field on the bank statement reconciliation. So this is really what data points are we going to look at to reconcile from our cash ledger transactions back to that bank statement. What are we going to use to actually match those together? So on our next slide here, we see a screenshot from FSM, and it's going to show a couple match rules that we had created. The first one's checks, the second one's deposits. You can see there's a couple different things here. We give descriptions and rules and system rules, which we'll get into. And then we did the match type. These are all one-to-one just to keep everything pretty straightforward for today's demo. You can do many to one, one to one, one to many, that sort of thing, and combine all these rules again into a rule group for that higher match rate. And then we are going to use custom groups, which we'll see in a minute. And these are user defined based on those attributes from the bank statement lines and those transactions to help match those transactions together. So on our next slide, we're going to see, we're actually clicking into the checks match rule. So we can see all the setup components here, and we'll talk about this. So I apologize, it might be a little blurry, but hopefully you can understand when we talk through it here. So we gave it the name checks and the description checks. Of course, it's active. Then we have a statement rule on the left here, and then we have a system rule. And then followed by that bold lettering. It is a little blurry, so you can just trust me that that's what it says. So the statement rule is telling it what to look for in the bank statement, and the system rule is saying what to look for in our system transactions. And these are custom groups. Don't worry, you don't have to know the syntax and how to group them together and that sort of thing just off the top of your head. There is something called a builder, which is going to help allow you to select that field and then say equals or greater than, less than, this or that sort of thing. It really helps you build it so you don't have to be an expert in that syntax there. So for our statement rule, we said look for the bank statement, and the cash category is going to equal checks, because again, we said anything from the BAI2 file that's 475 or so on, that's going to represent a check. So if we see a cash category check, that's what we're looking for. And then in our system rule, we're saying look at our transactions. So we're going to say, okay, if our bank transaction code, yeah, if you can mute, maybe that's what Cindy is saying. I'm sorry. And then so our system rule is saying system check. So if our bank transaction code in our system is CHK, which is what, again, we predetermined and set that up as, then that's going to be check as well. So we're going to try and match those two together. This next piece is going to be the method. So we're saying transaction number. So our check transaction number is what the data point that we're going to try and match between our system transaction and our bank statement. And then on the right, we get a variable source on statement. So I don't know how many people are familiar again with the BAI2 file, but they're all three fields next to each other, separated just by a single comma. And it's going to be a related reference, bank reference, or a text reference. So depending on where your bank puts that transaction number might be what you're going to tell it to refer back to, so it knows where on that BAI2 file to actually look for that transaction number that we're going to match back from our system. So you gotta have to pick and choose, and it really depends on your bank. A lot of banks do follow similar numbers like that 475 for checks. They follow similar numbering and like to put them in the same spots within that file, so you can keep the setup pretty consistent. But if your bank does do something a little differently, it allows you to customize and make sure we can set it up and get a higher reconciliation rate for you. A couple checkboxes here. We can remove leading zeros. So maybe your bank always puts a ton of leading zeros and we don't key those in when we're entering in those cash transactions. So we're going to have those removed. Again, just help things match a little easier. We can remove alpha characters. And then we can also reconcile by amount. Then all the way at the bottom here, we see reconciliation tolerances. Again, this is where you can do the one-to-one, many-to-one, one-to-many kind of thing. And we can set a different tolerance. So maybe it's going to be off by a penny, and we're okay with that. We can set these tolerances so that if it falls within that tolerance, it's still going to reconcile. Another key checkbox is the use lag or day lag. So sometimes a bank might record the transaction a day later, and on our BAI2 file, it's going to have a different date assigned to it than what we have in our system. You can use this day lag, and it's going to allow for that day difference, so we can still reconcile without having to manually intervene. All right, so that's a lot of the setup pieces and the rules. Now Heather's going to get into the actual reconciliation process and how we're going to go about that.
Okay, so we wanted to actually walk you through what it would look like to be in the system and do a bank reconciliation. So the first screen we want to share with you is the bank statement interface. So Zach mentioned before the BAI2 files. So we can have, you can actually have your bank, have your bank statements be imported directly into Infor. So this is where you would come in and see them. And so this is nice to see kind of what data you have to work with and what's been imported and what hasn't. It's also a place you can come to troubleshoot something if maybe you're not seeing something that you were anticipating. The next screen here is the bank statements. So this is your main screen. This is where you come in and do your reconciliation and kind of click around and to see more of the details. But from the screen, you can see your account number, your bank statement number, the statement date, your beginning balance, ending balance, and then the status. So in this example that we're showing you, you can see here that most of our statements have been reconciled. And walk you through what that looks like. And then we also have one that hasn't been reconciled. So we'll actually go ahead and show you what the process is there to go ahead and reconcile. So first, this screen is a bank statement with a reconciled status. So when you click in on the first tab, you can see the unmatched transactions. And as you can see in the middle of the screen, there's no data available. So this is what we would anticipate seeing for a reconciled bank statement. So that means that all of our transactions have been matched. Then you can actually go ahead and drill in and see the details of each line. So in this example, we can see here that this was auto matched based on the rules that Zach was talking about previously. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see the additional transaction details. So we know here that this was transaction number 1011. So we wrote a check on 7/24/2019 for $37,500, and then it was cashed later on 4/6/2020. So when the bank statement came in, it picked up the check had been cashed, it picked up our previous entry and matched on both. So next we can go ahead and walk through an unreconciled bank statement. So we would go ahead and click in just like we did before. And you'll notice the screen looks a little different. Instead of having no data in the unmatched transaction list, we have 3 lines here from our bank statement that haven't been matched. So the first thing that you can go ahead and do is just click on the load and reconcile button. And what that will do for you is it'll rerun your match rules. So say that there's maybe a timing issue there, or you wanted to reset your reconciliation rules, it would go ahead and rerun. And if any of your transactions do match, you would pick them up and automatically reconcile them. But say that doesn't work. So say you have a data point that falls outside of the tolerances that you set through the match rules, you can go ahead and manually match your transactions. So we'll go ahead and walk you through how to do that. So in this example, we have transaction number 1008 in the middle of the screen up top. So the amount is $112,500. And then down below, we can see the same transaction. So what we do is go ahead and click on both transactions and then click the select transaction button. And as soon as you do that, you'll get these gray buttons, additional buttons up top. So on the top right side of your screen, you now have additional functionality. And then all you would do is go ahead and click the reconcile selected transaction button, and those 2 transactions would be matched. So when you come back in here, they would now show up as an additional line in your detailed match transactions. So that's the process of going ahead and manually matching a transaction. It's that simple. It's a pretty easy functionality to use. And then something else we wanted to show you guys that we think is really cool is the statement reconciliation dashboard. So this shows us, it's a great visual of just quickly seeing what's going on by each bank account. So in this example, we clicked into the bank statement from 4/5/2020, and on the screen, you'll see the 4 boxes. These are widgets that can be personalized based on your organization's needs. So in this example, we have amounts, statement line by category, reconciliation amount by category, and then reconciled status. And so starting in the first box, in the amounts box, since this statement was fully reconciled, everything is showing up in the left column under reconciled. You can see the deposits, the payments, and then the net amount. Going down below that in the statement line by category, you can see the total number of checks and then the total number of deposits. And then going to that middle box, we see the reconciled amount by category, which is similar to what we were just looking at, but this provides how many lines these numbers encompass. And then the reconciled status. So since this statement was fully reconciled, it's 100%. But say you had 100 lines and maybe 90 of the lines are reconciled, you would get a 90% reconciliation rate. And then you could see that 10% of your lines haven't been reconciled, and that might be something you kind of go in and keep an eye on and go ahead and fix. So this is great if you are working in the system or if you're a manager. It's just a really easy way to see what's going on with the different bank statements and how far they have been reconciled.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather. Since we did have a good bit of time left, I did want to touch on a couple other pieces. First, I referenced the BAI2 file quite a bit, and that's the one we've been working with a majority lately when implementing this bank statement reconciliation processes. But it is also compatible with the BAI, the BAI2, MT940s, which I think are more international, widely used internationally. And then maybe a smaller bank can only provide a CSV file. We can also make that work as well. And then the other piece for that bank statement interface, we can control whether we want to manually interface those when they come in through those file channels, or we can have them automatically interface is usually what we prefer, so that you don't have to go through that action. And then one of the other setup components is going to be the cash calendar. This is where we're going to identify work days, bank days, and if not, it's a holiday, so that the system knows when to expect those bank files for us. So we see what a person has multiple dashboards. You could have it on a single dashboard, but then this is where it can get different. Maybe there's different cash accounts are going to be on different bank statements, or whether depending if they're coming from different financial institutions or not. As you click through those different bank statements, you'll be able to see the different components and graphs and totals and that sort of thing. But you won't need multiple dashboards for that. Good question. Do we have any other questions? That's a lot to digest. I know this is new functionality. So all these concepts are new to everybody. And so it's kind of hard to do this in 20, 30, 40 minutes. So if you do digest this a little bit more afterwards, feel free to reach out to questions@rpic.com with any other questions, and we can definitely get back to you on those. Do we have recommendations on obtaining BAI files from banks? So from our experience, it does take a little bit of time to get that back from the bank, but really you can just reach out and ask for an old file or a test file, something like that, and they usually can provide that for you. And then that way, the sooner you can do that, the sooner you can check your cache categories to make sure they follow more of like the traditional numbering rules and that sort of thing. And then it also makes sure that we set up all those cache categories that are going to be represented on that bank statement, so that it's going to reconcile for us. But banks are usually happy to provide test files for us. The one thing to note is this is a little harder to test, definitely in like our test sandbox. Most of the setup and configuration is one-time setup, and then you get to keep using this, and it's going to follow the same rules and keep reconciling and working great for you. The problem with our sandbox and why we didn't demo this live is you have to match bank statements for that BAI2 file back to transactions within our sandbox, and these are ones we just manually keyed in because again, this isn't production and we're not live in this system. So we'd have to manually create a BAI2 file to match what we have in this system. And then each time we wanted to demo it, we did new transactions, new files. So it's a little bit harder to really demo and test, but we have got some pretty good workarounds and ways to do that.
Zach, it looks like there's a question from Montgomery as well, right above that.
Can system create bank processing rules? So you're going to define these processing rules, and we can definitely give you some guidelines and ways to follow it. But you're going to need to cater this towards which data points you're trying to match and tolerances and that sort of thing. So but again, it's a one-time setup. So once we do it, you don't really have to mess around with it too much. Let me read this last question here. So this one we did talk about, and this was more of a daily reconciliation. You can definitely reconcile weekly or monthly. There are some different views, and we can always view those statements and everything that's reconciled. And these dashboards are really helpful to quickly click through and see if everything's 100% reconciled. I guess I'm still trying to understand this question. Let's see. There's also some, I guess I'm still a little foggy on what you're asking here, but there's some controls. There's some different closing pieces. Yep, perfect. Yeah, Cindy, there's some reports for that. And there's also some closing pieces to make sure we did everything that we need to do in order to close. It's going to have those system checks for you as well. Yeah, there's definitely some canned reports. Thank you, Cindy. And we got plenty of time for more questions. We're willing to share any other info or anything like that. Again, questions at rpic.com. Can also get you some answers later on.
Do you guys see Erica's question?
What's that?
Do you see Erica's question?
I don't. Let me.
She asks, how does the system create transactions from the bank file?
Cindy, if you're still out there and you want to answer that one, you might be able to explain it in a little bit clearer terms. Let me refresh this. I'm not seeing. Awesome. Yeah, thanks everybody chiming in. There's also functionality for like bank fees that we can create those transactions as well coming in from that, as long as we identify and tell Infor how to interpret those bank statement lines. Yeah, we see most of the people we work with before implementing this do it all in Excel, and a lot of people I've been in communication with, and this can definitely save a lot of time. And again, as Cindy pointed out in her previous demos, and Heather talked about today, it's not going to match 100%, or not, at least not all the time, but it does reconcile a good bit with like 90-95%. And then, as Heather also demoed, it's pretty easy to manually match, and it helps select those and cleanly organize what you selected and where to reconcile. Again, if you made any mistakes when you're manually doing that piece, you can just reset reconciliations. It's going to clear all of that, and you can start clean. Maybe you left, forgot where you were, what you were doing. There was just an error you noticed. You do have that option to start clean as well. Once you go into your closing procedures for the month is when you can't clear those reconciliations anymore. But